Hey YouTube, this is Alexander, and I've been using the OnePlus 2 for about 2 weeks now, and I think it's time for a full video review. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. This is my OnePlus 2 review. Just as a disclaimer, I'm using the 64GB model with 4 gigs of RAM for the review since OnePlus was all out of the 16GB models, not that you should pick up a 16GB phone in 2015 anyway. Now the OnePlus 2 starts at $329 for the 16GB model with 3 gigs of RAM and jumps up to $389 for the 64GB model with 4 gigs of RAM. But should you spend all those Benjamins on this phone? Let's find out. So we'll begin with build quality and feel in the hand. Now OnePlus 2 has an aluminum and magnesium alloy frame with stainless steel accents along with the sandstone black back cover, which is a fancy way of saying really grippy plastic. Don't get me wrong, I think the sandstone black cover feels ultra nice, sort of like a worn down grip tape on a skateboard. Couple that grippiness with the metal frame and you've got yourself a pretty awesome feeling phone. It's comfortable without being too big to hold or maneuver and does have a bit of heft coming in at 175 grams. That heft makes for a solid feeling phone, which I do like. Additionally, the buttons on the side no longer feel like cheap plastic as they did on the OnePlus One, which is a much welcome change. There's no wobbling here and the buttons have a very satisfying click to them, but I do wish one was textured to better easily tell them apart. While not a huge problem, it is a bit of a nuisance. But anyway, let's move on to the alert slider. Of course, this is also made of the same metal as the volume rocker and power button, but instead of clicking, you guessed it, it slides. Now it does feel very nice as well, and when sliding up or down, there's this pronounced click noise to indicate that you've gone from one notification mode to another, as well as a quick vibrate, which is all around very soft, thus making it easy to miss notifications while in vibrate mode. Anyway, it's a neat idea, but honestly, I found it to be more work having to manually switch into priority mode at night before bed than to just let the software do it for me. You may not feel the same, and I can see how maybe before a movie it's more convenient, but for me it just wasn't. Now, it wouldn't have been so bad if OnePlus hadn't removed the software controls for the notification modes, but alas, they're gone. Moving on, let's talk about that USB Type-C port and speaker. The addition of a USB Type-C port makes for a love-hate relationship with me. The fact that it's there is both awesome and an inconvenience. It's an inconvenience because it immediately renders all other micro USB cables useless when I want to charge up since they don't fit it. However, it's awesome because the cable can be plugged into the phone in either direction. This is one of those times when being on the bleeding edge of consumer technology can be an annoyance. Overall though, I found the USB Type-C cable to be much more handy than your typical micro USB, and I hope to see it in a lot more phones soon. Now for that speaker. The thing about the speaker is that it's downward facing, and I think that's its biggest fault. The audio is able to get pretty loud without much distortion and actually doesn't sound too bad, although the lows aren't too deep, but when it's just one relatively small grill outputting the sounds, covering it can be pretty easy, especially if you're playing a game or watching a video in landscape mode. I wouldn't say the speakers are bad, they're just not anything particularly outstanding, but Oxygen OS does have some speaker EQ profile settings to get the most out of your sound if that's something you're into. Now that fingerprint sensor. The fingerprint sensor is an interesting story. So to be clear, this is not a physical button that is pressed down like on the iPhone or Galaxy S6. This is a capacitive button that need only be touched like the on-screen buttons in order to react. With that said, I never really had any issues with the home button functioning as a home button, but the fingerprint sensor is a slightly different story. So I noticed there to be a slight delay from the time it recognized my fingerprint to the time it actually reacted and unlocked the phone. I'm not sure why there's such a noticeable delay, but it makes the very quick fingerprint sensor seem a little slower since the phone is delayed in waking up. Also, I found the fingerprint sensor to be more accurate most of the time with only a few errors, and I think this has something to do with how much of your finger you use when you first set up your fingerprint lock method. The fingerprint sensor is really cool, but between being a guy who doesn't have his phone locked anyway and the OnePlus 2 not sporting NFC for Android Pay, I'd say it wasn't really necessary, for me at least. One major reason an Android phone should have a fingerprint sensor is to use Android Pay in an easy fashion, but the omission of NFC here on the OnePlus 2 makes it hard for me to really care about the fingerprint sensor at all. Moving on, let's talk about the camera. So the OnePlus 2 touts a 13 megapixel camera with dual LED flash, optical image stabilization, an aperture of 2.0 and laser autofocus. What does it mean in everyday language? Well, it means pretty good photos for the most part. I found the camera to take nice sharp photos when there was a lot of light present, but in low light there was noticeable noise. I also found that HDR was sometimes super aggressive and really made the image quite bright with the tendency to blow out or overexpose the whites. I also noticed that when shooting in 4K, the camera needed to refocus quite a bit, but if you'd like to see that for yourself, hit the card up top to check out the video or click the link in the description. Overall, the camera was capable of taking some really nice shots and the camera app itself was quite pleasant to use. I particularly enjoyed being able to quickly swipe between the different modes much like you can on an iPhone. Oh, and the manual mode is pretty nice too if you ever want to get some bokeh shots or just fine tune what settings you use. Well, let's move on to battery life. So the OnePlus 2 is sporting a pretty big 3300 mAh battery which powers a 1920 by 1080p 5.5 inch LCD display, so you'd expect really great battery life, right? Battery life that was close to, if not better than its OnePlus One brother, right? Well, not really. During the first week and a half of testing, I was running OxygenOS 2.0.3, which yielded battery life that wasn't so great. I often found myself charging it up at home between classes, and the fact that it lacks any sort of quick charge made that experience even worse. However, during the last few days of testing, I received the OTA update to OxygenOS 2.1, and I was hoping for better battery life. Now, I'm not sure if it actually did improve battery life, but something must have happened after that update, because then I was able to make it much easier into the later part of my day. But my days are long, waking up at 6:15 in the morning and going to bed around 1 in the morning, so I still often find myself charging it before I go on my nightly walks around 7:30 p.m. It seems like OxygenOS could use a few more updates to get the most battery out of the OnePlus 2 because I think it could be much better. Since it's been mentioned, let's talk about that display. As noted, it's a 5.5 inch 1920 by 1080 LCD panel, but don't let that sub Quad HD resolution fool you. It has some great viewing angles, there's no pinking at lower levels, and it's an all-around sharp panel. The main con is that it doesn't seem at all very saturated. Now maybe you don't mind the lack of saturation, but I've become adjusted to it with my Nexus 6. However, that doesn't mean the OnePlus 2's display isn't good. In fact, quite the opposite. It's actually an all-around nice display that gets very bright, so bright that I actually have to turn it down at times because my eyes are just too sensitive. Now moving on to performance, I know there was quite the talk about how hot the OnePlus 2 gets with its Snapdragon 810 version 2.1, but honestly I never experienced anything that seemed too hot for a phone. The only times I really noticed a warm up was when I was charging it and using it at the same time, but I also noticed that with my other phones and to a lesser extent my Nexus 7. I would say that the heating seemed more pronounced because of the 2's metal frame, but it was never something that concerned me. That isn't to say performance was so throttled that it was bad either. Performance was just fine. I'm not huge on gaming, but playing Grand Theft Auto San Andreas went without a hitch, and everyday tasks weren't really a problem either. But let's go ahead and talk about OxygenOS now. OxygenOS is the name for OnePlus's skin, and it's based on Android 5.1.1, and it comes with quite a few customization tweaks. Firstly, there's the option to rearrange the quick setting tiles or disable them, which is really handy. Another neat addition is the dark system theme and accent color, which I found to be useful at night. There are also off-screen gestures like double tap to wake and drawing a V to activate the flashlight while your screen is off, among others, although I found these to rarely work, so I just ended up disabling these. You also have the option of using custom icon packs with the OnePlus launcher, which is one of my favorite additions. Then there's Shelf, which is basically a collection of widgets that will display information such as frequent contacts, apps, and weather. You can also add more widgets to the area, but I haven't really found it to be too useful, so I just disabled it, and I'm actually on the Google Now launcher. Overall, OxygenOS is a pretty cool skin that I enjoy using, aside from the bugs which range from app hangups and forced closes to my time zone being switched while in automatic mode. While these are the only two major bugs I've dealt with, they're annoying, but the silver lining is that they should be fixable with software updates. So is the OnePlus 2 the 2016 flagship killer that OnePlus hyped it up to be? Not at all. The lack of NFC at a time when mobile payments are just on the horizon not only deems the OnePlus 2 unworthy of being labeled future-proof, but also of the title Flagship Killer. And that doesn't come easy to say because I really wanted to like this phone as much as I liked my OnePlus One, but OnePlus really shot themselves by not future-proofing this phone. Is this phone worth the money you'll pay for it? Probably not. With no quick charging, no NFC, and an overall good but easily forgettable package, you may be better off spending your money elsewhere, unless you don't mind waiting in line via the invite system and don't care for those extra niceties. Anyway, that's gonna end it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed it, and if you did, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe down there for more videos, including my coverage on the Nexus 6P, and don't forget to check out my entire OnePlus 2 playlist for all my coverage on the OnePlus 2 if you'd like. That's it for this video, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.